A very good morning to you on Wednesday, 21st of December. Welcome to the ceremonial opening of the Gibraltar Parliament. Just on your screens, Gibraltar's Chief Minister Fabian Picardo arriving for today's ceremonial opening. It's the second opening since Gibraltar's new constitution, the second Parliament, and Gibraltar's 12th Parliament. Already having taken his seat inside the chamber, the Chief Justice, Justice Anthony Dudley, and also on your screens now to the left, to the government bench with the ministers, on the right the opposition bench, and there is Mr. Picardo just arriving for today's session, Gibraltar's new Chief Minister. Amongst the guests, the Bishop, Ralph Heskett, on the front seats as well, the wives and partners of the different members of Parliament. 17 elected members to the Gibraltar Parliament, 10 in government, formed by the GSLP Liberals, 7 in opposition by the GSD. On your screens there is Justine, the Chief Minister's wife. Next to her is Penny, she's the wife of Dr. Joseph Garcia, and also Rose Bossano. Other guests and dignitaries behind them is the Attorney General Ricky Roder, and the Mayor Julio Alcantara with his wife, also the Commander of British Forces, representatives of the different associations and communities in Gibraltar. And they've started to arrive in the last few minutes. Jaime Levy, they're also taking his seat in the chamber. This is the ceremonial opening of Parliament. You can see people lining Main Street to welcome the ministers. There'll also be a guard of honour formed by the Royal Gibraltar Police and later on by the Royal Gibraltar Regiment. The Governor, Sir Adrian Johns, is also due to arrive later on in the proceedings once the Speaker has been sworn in. And there is Gibraltar's new government, Stephen Linares, John Cortes, Samantha Sacramento, taking their seats on this side of the House for the first time, Neil Costa, Dr. Joseph Garcia, Chief Minister Fabian Picardo,
Mr. Presiding Member,
Paul Valvang, Gilbert Ligudi and Charles Busson also there. The mace brought into the House, and Joe Bossano taking his seat as a presiding member. He's the eldest member of the House and therefore today's presiding member. All the ministers will be taking the oath of allegiance, and this will enable them to conduct business in Parliament.
Oath of allegiance of honourable members. The Honourable Fabian Raymond Picardo.
As traditional, first up, Gibraltar's new Chief Minister.
I, Fabian Raymond Picardo, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
The Honourable Joseph John Garcia.
One by one, this process will be repeated as the ministers take the oath of allegiance.
I, Joseph John Garcia, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors according to law. So help me God.
This is Joseph Garcia, the Deputy Chief Minister.
The Honourable John Emmanuel Cortes.
John Cortes, the Minister for Health and the Environment.
I, John Emmanuel Cortes, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
Witnessed once again by the Chief Justice.
The Honourable Charles Arthur Rousson.
Charles Rousson, Minister for Housing and the Elderly.
I, Charles Arthur Brisson, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
The Honourable Samantha Jane Sacramento.
Samantha Sacramento, who's the Minister for Equality and Social Services.
I, Samantha Jane Sacramento, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
The Honourable Gilbert Horace Likudi.
Gilbert Likudi, and he's been entrusted with the Ministries for Education, Financial Services, Gaming, Telecommunications and Justice.
I, Gilbert Horace Likudi, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
The Honourable Joseph John Bossano.
Joe Bossano, Minister for Enterprise, Training and Employment, and also today's presiding member.
I, Joseph John Bossano, do solemnly affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law.
The Honourable Neil Francis Costa.
Neil Costa, he's the Minister for Tourism, Public Transport and the Port.
I, Neil Francis Costa, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
The Honourable Paul John Balban.
Paul Balbang, Minister for Traffic, Health and Safety and Technical Services.
I, Paul John Balban, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
The Honourable Stephen Ernest Linares.
And this is Stephen Linares, Minister for Sports, Culture, Heritage and Youth.
I, Stephen Ernest Linares, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
And this completes the list of the government ministers taking the oath of allegiance. Now opposition members will do likewise.
The Honourable Peter Richard Caruana.
Leader of the Opposition, Peter Caruana.
I, Peter Richard Caruana, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors according to law, so help me God.
The Honourable Daniel Anthony Feetham.
Daniel Feetham takes on enterprise and business, inward investment and justice.
I, Daniel Anthony Feetham, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors according to law, so help me God.
The Honourable Isabel Marie Elul Hammond.
Newcomer to the House, Isabel Elul Hammond, Opposition spokeswoman for Health, Civil Contingencies and Education.
I, Isabel Marie Elul Hammond, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
The Honourable Damon James Bossino.
Another of the three opposition newcomers to the House, Damon Bossino, who will shadow transport and tourism.
I, Damon James Bossino, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
The Honourable Edwin Joseph Reyes.
Edwin Reyes, and he's been assigned as opposition spokesman for housing, culture and heritage, sport and leisure, and youth.
I, Edwin Joseph Redis, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
The Honourable James Joseph Neto.
Jaime Neto, opposition spokesman for care services, the elderly, social security and social assistance.
I, James Joseph Neto, do solemnly affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law.
The Honourable Selwyn Matthew Figueras.
The seventh opposition member, Selwyn Figueras, was responsibility for the environment in our city, lands and development and utilities.
I, Selwyn Matthew Figueras, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
So all members of Parliament have taken the oath of allegiance, and now the Chief Minister will move the motion on the appointment of the Speaker of Parliament.
Motion on the appointment of the Speaker of the Parliament. The Honourable the Chief Minister.
Mr. Presiding Member, I have the honour to move the motion standing in my name, namely that Harish Kishan Chand Budrani be appointed Speaker of the Gibraltar Parliament. Mr. Presiding Member, first of all, it is fantastic to see you recognised in your role as Father of the House, as the longest-serving member, now here since 1972. By your taking the chair, we follow today the tradition at Westminster that it should be the longest-serving member who takes the chair at these times. On the substantive motion, all I will say is that in the difficult and combative times in the past 4 years, Harish Budrani has, in my view, pleased and displeased members on both sides of the House in almost equal measure. And that seems to me to be an excellent qualification for continuing in post. As we move towards an agenda of reforming this place, I think there is a great value in continuity, and I'm very grateful for Mr. Budrani's agreement to continue in post. Having not supported his initial appointment, it gives me great pleasure to now propose the motion to appoint him, demonstrating how he has proved our concerns wrong by his fair treatment of all members and his always amiable disposition at the worst and cruelest moments of our recent parliamentary history. I therefore commend the motion to the House.
The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Honourable Presiding Member, the opposition will support the motion for all the reasons that the Honourable the Chief Minister has cited, which are the very reasons that caused us to nominate Harish Budrani as Speaker in the first place. At the time that the Honourable members opposite withheld their approval of him, expressing reservation of judgments, we assured them across the floor of the House that they would overcome those reservations. Indeed they have, and it is a matter of some satisfaction that it is they who are now proposing the nomination and we who are supporting
So we will support the motion.
Mr. Presiding Member.
I now put the question, which is that Mr. Harish Kishan Budrani be appointed as Speaker of the Parliament. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Passed.
And so as Parliament is formally constituted, Harish Budrani now officially becomes Speaker of Parliament. He first became Speaker in 2004 and is to continue in such a role.
Mr. Speaker. Oath of Allegiance of the Speaker, the Honourable Harish Kishan Budrani.
I, Harish Kishan Budrani, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
And shortly the Governor will be arriving in Parliament. He'll be received with a royal salute as the official process continues in the chamber, the Chief Justice witnessing the oath of allegiance. The mace is now raised. Parliament is now officially in session.
My first duty to the House is to record my respectful acknowledgement and grateful thanks for the great honour and privilege you have conferred upon me by placing me in the chair. May I also express my gratitude to the Father of the House for presiding over the debate on the Honourable the Chief Minister's motion for my appointment as Speaker. The office, which dates back to 1376, is modelled on the Speakership of the House of Commons at Westminster, and the title is derived from the ancient position of spokesman of the Commons to the monarch. In the days when Sovereign and Commons were frequently at odds, the job was rather more precarious than it is today, because it was often the case of shoot the messenger if the king did not like the news delivered by the speaker. Indeed, no less than 7 speakers were beheaded between 1394 and 1535. There is no record of the number incarcerated. It is hardly surprising that members were usually loath to accept, let alone seek, the office, and on appointment had to be literally dragged to the chair by their peers. A scene which continues to be enacted to this day, when the newly elected Speaker feigns reluctance to assume the chair. Execution, mercifully, is not a fate which is likely to befall me, and that is why, you may have noticed, I had a spring in my step as I made my way up those 3 steps to accept this unique and privileged office. In a parliamentary democracy such as ours, it is the elected members who have to answer to their constituents from day to day and submit themselves to the electorate every 4 years. My duty in presiding over the proceedings of this august body is to give all the members a full and fair opportunity to discharge their obligations. And I respectfully ask the honourable members on both sides to assist me in this task by remembering at all times that good temper and moderation are the characteristics of parliamentary language. 2 weeks ago, 90 years almost to the day after the first ever elections in Gibraltar, an impressive 82% of a record electorate turned out to vote in the general elections. The democratic process saw 6 members of the last parliament make way for those who were elected for the first time, and the 11 who were re-elected find themselves sitting across from where they last sat. those changes in personnel and seating will, I am told by the Honourable the Chief Minister, be followed before long by changes to our parliamentary practices and procedures to reflect the Honourable Gilbert Likudhi's unsuccessful amendment to the motion which was debated and passed in this House on the 5th September. I look forward to playing my part in shaping those changes and to implementing whatever changes the elected members decide upon. One thing that will not change, however, is my determination to serve every member of this House, regardless of where he or she may sit, to the very best of my ability and with the utmost integrity and impartiality. I conclude by renewing with humility the solemn pledge that I made for the first time in 2004 and again in 2007, that I will, to the very best of my ability, uphold the privileges, rights and dignity of this House and of its members.
Oath of office of the Minister with responsibility for justice, the Honourable Gilbert Horace Likudhi.
Gilbert Likudhi now taking the oath of office for Minister for Justice. It's separate to the others under the new constitution.
Gilbert Horace Likudhi, do swear that in the office of Minister with responsibility for justice, I will respect the rule of law, defend the independence of the judiciary, and discharge my duty to ensure the provision of resources for the efficient and effective support of the courts for which I am responsible. So help me God.
The Ministry for Justice, the only office that requires the extra oath, being taken by Gilbert Likudhi. And this time presided over by the Speaker of Parliament, Haresh Budrani.
With your leave, honourable members, I will absent myself from the chambers for a few minutes, hopefully, in order to receive His Excellency the Governor.
Now proceedings will move to the next stage. As we cross outside Parliament, Commissioner of Police Lewis Wink, and we're awaiting the arrival of the Governor and Lady Johns. A guard of honour provided by the Royal Gibraltar Police, and you can see many people arriving in Main Street to follow the proceedings from outside. Once they arrive, Lady Johns will be escorted into the chamber, and then the Governor, Sir Adrian Johns, will take his seat together with the Speaker and the Chief Justice. You may also have noticed earlier on inside that there are two more members sitting behind the government bench. They are the officers of Parliament, the Principal Auditor James Bosso and the Ombudsman Mario Hook, who are also following the proceedings here today, and they are sat behind the government bench. And there they are on your screens, sitting behind Chief Minister Fabian Picardo. A full chamber, as can be expected, with members of families as the Speaker. Haresh Budrani has moved outside with a clerk to Parliament, Melvin Farrell, awaiting the arrival of the Governor and his wife. A reminder, this is the ceremonial opening of the Gibraltar Parliament on the 21st of December, with the GSLP Liberals forming Gibraltar's new government and the GSD the opposition. They have all taken and signed the Oath of Allegiance, and this allows them to now officially transact business in Parliament. police escort now arriving outside Parliament House. Which signals the arrival or imminent arrival of the Governor and Lady Johns. Yes, the motorcyclist and the police escort is the minute rider. He arrives just a minute before the official car. And also taking their place at John Mackintosh Square and in Main Street are members of the Royal Gibraltar Regiment. Many guests are inside the chamber. They include the partners of the respective ministers and members of the opposition, different representatives from associations and bodies. Just to the left of your screen there is the wife of Haresh Budrani, Angelina, the wife of the Speaker. Also to your right, the respective partners of our new ministers. Also amongst the dignitaries, former members of the House. And also Richard Turr, he's a head tutor at Oriel College, where Fabian Picardo studied law. He's also amongst the guests here today. And now, here is the arrival of the Governor, Sir Adrian Johns, and Lady Johns. They arrive to a royal salute. Lady Johns will be escorted into the house by the ADC. Sir Adrian Johns will now inspect the Guard of Honour. The Governor is accompanied by the Commissioner of Police, Lewis Wink, and the ADC to the Governor. As he takes time to speak to members of the Royal Gibraltar Police. Inside, the House is upstanding for the arrival of the Governor into the chamber. And then proceedings will continue. There'll also be speeches and addresses by the Chief Minister and Leader of the Opposition.
Your Excellency, I have the honour to inform you that the members of this Parliament have been graciously pleased to appoint the Speaker. Many congratulations. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
We could hear Haresh Budrani confirming his appointment as Speaker to the Governor. And now he receives the keys from the Port Sergeant. And with the keys, Sir Adrian Johns will now make his way to the anteroom of the House of Parliament, as our pictures take you back inside, where the seat, the chair, is now ready for the Governor. Chief Justice Anthony Dudley will be sitting next to him. And outside, the police march away following the arrival of the Governor. Round of applause from some of the spectators there. Here's Melvin Farrell, once again, the clerk to Parliament.
Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the Governor.
Good morning, everybody. Please be seated.
The keys he took from the port sergeant in the lobby, now brought by the Governor
Mr.
into the
Speaker,
House.
Honourable members of Parliament, it is indeed a privilege formally to open this House of Parliament in Gibraltar following the election less than a fortnight ago on the 8th of December. In looking around the House, I see many who are well acquainted with and experienced in the ways of Parliament. But I also see a number of newly elected members on both sides. Indeed, over a third of this Parliament is now comprised of newly elected members. To you all, old hands and new faces alike, I offer my warmest congratulations on your election to this place. And I wish you all success in the term ahead. I also welcome you back, Mr. Speaker, and acknowledge the support that you've given this House over the last 4 years. And of course, right now we mourn the passing of one of your distinguished predecessors, Sir Bob Palisa, a great Gibraltarian to whom we said farewell earlier this week. It's been a stroke of good fortune for me to have been here for a general election. It's an event which is not guaranteed during every governor's tenure in office, and it's been a fascinating experience. I've been impressed by the demonstration of democracy in all its forms, through the debates, the manifestos, the media reporting, and through the very high level of public engagement. On the day of the election, I visited many of the polling stations, was present at the verification, and I witnessed at first hand the counting of the votes. The sense of responsibility and commitment of all those involved, and the meticulous attention to detail at every stage, contributed to what I can only describe as an unimpeachable process. And I pay tribute to the returning officer and every member of the team who delivered excellence in every aspect of the organisation and conduct of this election. Equally impressive was the palpable sense of pride and determination of people everywhere to play an active part in their democracy and to exercise their right to vote. And vote they did in great numbers. More people, I believe, voted than at any other election in Gibraltar's history. And the turnout of 82.5% was hugely impressive by any standard. I should also like to pay tribute to the candidates, both those present in the House today as members of the government or the opposition, and also to those who were not on this occasion elected. Gibraltar's democracy is greatly enriched by both the fact and the manner of your participation in the electoral process, your personal endeavour, the support of families and friends, and the mutual respect shown by leaders, candidates, and supporters alike, particularly when the results were announced, I think highlighted the dignity and generosity that are fundamental elements of the democratic process and epitomised much of what is best about Gibraltar. In short, the election was a beacon of democratic excellence. Her Majesty's Government of Gibraltar is committed to a fundamental reform of the way other aspects of democracy work in Gibraltar. In particular, the Government will establish an independent commission to undertake a review of the way democracy works in Gibraltar and make recommendations for reform. It will call monthly meetings of Parliament. It will adopt a ministerial code and propose a parliamentary code to regulate the conduct of ministers and members of Parliament respectively. The Government will introduce legislation for a Freedom of Information Act, which will allow citizen access to current information and all official documents over 20 years old. It will introduce legislation within the next 100 days to ban bullying and harassment in the workplace, followed within 180 days by legislation for a Public Interest Disclosure Act for the protection of those who come forward to provide information relating to corruption or other wrongdoing. The Government will strengthen further laws to prevent bribery and corruption and establish an independent authority to address allegations related to such crimes. It will establish a review of the civil service, potentially resulting in the introduction of legislation for a Civil Service Act. It will establish an Equal Opportunities Commission as provided for under the Equal Opportunities Act. And it will introduce legislation to reform the Development and Planning Commission and open all its meetings to public. And it will introduce the practice of publishing online, insofar as possible, all legislation as command papers at least 2 weeks before publication of bills in the Government Gazette. Mr. Speaker, these are times of change and great uncertainty in the world, in Europe, and in Gibraltar. At a point where nations are challenging undemocratic regimes, where financial systems are under strain, and where the future of the Eurozone, and with it Britain's relationship with the European Union, are all in the spotlight, many old uncertainties cannot be taken for granted. Gibraltar and the United Kingdom together face many challenges, and a close working partnership will be essential. But there is a bond between Gibraltar and the UK that transcends challenge and uncertainty, and that is the bond of sovereignty. It is entirely appropriate, therefore, that at the opening of this session of Parliament, and in order to underpin the work and confidence of this new government and this House, I affirm once again the United Kingdom's commitment never to enter into arrangements under which the people of Gibraltar would pass under the sovereignty of another state against their wishes, nor to enter into a process of sovereignty negotiations with which Gibraltar is not content. Mr. Speaker, in these turbulent times, the people of Gibraltar will look to their Parliament to represent their interests and to ensure a secure and prosperous future for Gibraltar. I know that all in this House will work together across the political divide to ensure that this challenge is met. I wish members of the House, in government and in opposition, all success in tackling their work and in fulfilling the responsibility which the people of Gibraltar have placed upon them. I have great pleasure in declaring open this session of the House of Parliament.
The Governor, Sir Adrian Johns.
The Chief Minister.
Now here's Chief
Your
Minister
Excellency,
Fabian Picardo.
Mr. Speaker, it is undoubtedly a great honour to respond on behalf of the Government to Your Excellency's address on the occasion of this second ceremonial opening of our Parliament. As we continue to develop constitutionally, it will not have been lost on anyone that the speech delivered by Your Excellency has tinges in it of the style of address by Her Majesty at state openings of another Parliament. That is how it should be in an emancipated environment where the Crown in Parliament gives effect to the will of the people as determined in general election. Our relationship with the Crown is therefore clearly not just modern, it is evolving into the tailor-made option that we as a people are entitled to carve for ourselves in the world. A niche which will set in stone our desire for British sovereignty to continue in perpetuity alongside the recognition of our international rights as a people. The fact is that nothing we have achieved as a people has been easily won, and therefore the fact that we may have to stand our ground, unmovable as our rock, in the face of nations determined to usurp our rights and recolonize our future, will not dampen Gibraltarian spirits one bit. As Her Majesty's Government of Gibraltar, we will therefore embark on a campaign to defend our international political rights and our territorial rights in such fora as may be necessary. The social, economic and political development of this great nation of ours will therefore progress our pace as we take our place in the international community. In doing so, Her Majesty's Government of Gibraltar will stretch out a hand of friendship and cooperation to all our neighbours. We will seek to continue talks with our Spanish neighbours to the north on matters of mutual interest and which will improve the lives of people on both sides of the frontier. None of that willingness to cooperate should be interpreted by anyone, anywhere, as any diminution of the position of all previous, and I am sure all future governments of Gibraltar, that our people will never succumb to political harassment or economic pressure to abandon our rightful path of political development and our fundamental human right to determine the future of this land and sea of ours. We will continue to be less than impressed by those whose arguments are based exclusively on a 300-year-old treaty. We will much prefer to rely on the modern treaty that is the Charter of the United Nations, Article 1 of which explicitly sets out that the purpose of the UN is to develop friendly relations amongst nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. For that reason, I warmly welcome your statement as Her Majesty's representative, repeating the commitment that the United Kingdom will never enter into any arrangements under which the people of Gibraltar would pass under the sovereignty of another state against our wishes, nor, and this is equally important, enter into a process of sovereignty negotiations with which Gibraltar is not content. It could not be otherwise, because having entrusted the United Kingdom in our constitution with the administration of our external affairs, those matters must be dealt with only in keeping with our wishes. And given that continuing bond with the Crown, I'm delighted that this incoming Diamond Jubilee year will see a visit to Gibraltar by the Earl and Countess of Wessex. Whilst we continue to await a visit from Her Majesty herself, we will warmly welcome Prince Edward and Princess Sophie to Gibraltar 57 years after Her Majesty's last visit. Your Excellency, Her Majesty's Government of Gibraltar will also be seeking to establish a more permanent structure for bilateral relations with the government of the Kingdom of Morocco, our emerging North African neighbour. Many Moroccan men and women travelled to Gibraltar in the 1960s to help us to maintain our economy alive and Britain's military interests viable when General Franco ordered the closure of the frontier with Spain. Today, many of those people still live amongst us. We survived and prospered during and after the blockade, and we can prosper further by developing links with our southern neighbour for the mutual benefit of our people. Your Excellency has already highlighted a number of matters that relate to our agenda for government. The manifesto with which we fought the general election set out our programme for government in great detail. Already, we have started the process of delivering on our commitments. A minister has been appointed with responsibility for commerce, which will include small businesses specifically as part of his brief. A minister for equality has already been appointed. The reform of the town planning process is underway. This week, we'll see the town planner appointed as chairman of the Development and Planning Commission, and a subcommittee is being set up to deal with minor work applications more efficiently. The King Report into the future of GBC will be published later this week. We are preparing for the publication of our first command paper, which will allow for wider consultation on all legislation at a pre-bill stage. And perhaps most importantly, we're in the process already of drafting the terms of reference for the Independent Commission on Democratic, Political and Electoral Reform. I will be consulting the Leader of the Opposition shortly on the proposed terms of reference and the proposed composition of the Commission. One thing that will happen straight away is that I will be seeking to convene monthly meetings of this Parliament and to publish, insofar as is possible, a parliamentary timetable to indicate to the public and the press when things will happen in this place. I am sure I will be able to count on the goodwill of those opposite to make our first faltering steps into a more mature parliamentary process as positive as possible for us all and the general public in particular. Another innovation at a practical level will be that the cameras that accompany us here today, I hope, will not be leaving us for 4 years until the next ceremonial opening or the date on which we receive your successor here. We will soon be commencing a process to open up the proceedings of this place to the public, both on the public broadcaster in consultation with GBC and online. I have already put at the disposal of the House the government's IT resources so that at parliament.gi email addresses can be set up for all members, and a Wi-Fi network should be available shortly in the House and its precincts for use of members, staff and reporters. I'm also happy to report to the House that since the 9th of December, we have held 4 meetings of the full Cabinet of Ministers which I chair. We have started as we mean to go on, taking decisions collectively. Your Excellency, the general election and the run-up to it is necessarily a bruising political time. It is right that we should hold each other to political account and test our respective policies and ideologies in a robust and strenuous fashion. We must never, however, fall into the trap of denigrating the contributions those of us who come into politics make to our community to make it a better place. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition held the post of Chief Minister for almost 16 years, and I salute his contribution to public life over the past 20 years since he was first elected to this place. We have disagreed on many things, and where we have agreed, our political system has not always called for us to say so. The fact that we come from rival ideologies need not condemn us to denigrate each other's persons. The Honourable Mr. Bossano, the Minister for Enterprise and Labour, has been in this House since the year I was born and has made a massive contribution to public life and trade unionism over the past 40 years, and that must also be recognised even by his political opponents. Suffice to say that the people have recognised it in his return to ministerial responsibility. I say these things, Your Excellency, because we owe it to ourselves to pursue the Westminster style of government and opposition in a manner that, although ideologically gladiatorial, does not spill over into the personal invective. I will not cast aspersions on others in saying that I therefore wish to promote a more convivial politics. I genuinely hope that we will be able to progressively adopt a new style of politics across the board and across the floor of the House, and not fall into the trap of the much easier and much less worthy practice of playing the man or woman and not the ball. For that reason, the fitness or otherwise of any person to be in this chamber today or to hold any post on either side must never be a matter for comment by us here. It is the people who have decided who is fit to do what job for the next 4 years, and it is only the people who have the right to make those judgments. In that context, I sincerely hope that we will be able to put the cut and thrust of debate into its proper parliamentary context under Mr. Speaker's eagle eye and attentive ear, so that we will be able to start work together on the review of the function of our Parliament and of our democracy in a more positive and convivial way as parliamentarians first. I agree with my predecessor that we must review all aspects of our voting system, including eligibility rules, our postal and absentee voting system, our electoral registration system, whereby a new register has to be created each time. And we also have to consider whether we should now have an electoral commission in our modern constitutional context. We can no longer avoid these issues. We need to reform and modernise the way that this House conducts its business, and that will be the role of the Independent Commission and then of this Parliament. Your Excellency, Mr. Speaker, An 82% turnout in an election where voting is not compulsory is a lesson in democracy for many alleged greater countries. It also gives us in this place the legitimacy necessary to do together the legislative business of the people and to require the parliamentary accountability that they demand. 90 years after it began, democracy goes from strength to strength in Gibraltar. I think I can speak for members on both sides of the House when I say that we are proud of the way in which our people have once again embraced their civic right and civic duty to vote in such huge numbers. It is right also to note the hard work that falls on the clerk in his guise as returning officer and all his staff when the franchise is exercised in such numbers. We will no doubt all be testing his patience and that of his staff in the coming 4 years, an apology in advance. Finally, Your Excellency, I welcome back to the House all those who returned from the last Parliament and those on both sides who are new to it. I am happy to say I've seen personal friends elected on both sides of the House. I also take this opportunity to wish a parliamentary farewell to those who by choice or by the cold steel of election night have not returned to this place. As Chief Minister, I follow in the footsteps of some great Gibraltarians, and I hope I shall not let them or our people down. Sir Bob, who we have recently lost, was just such a great. He will be sorely missed by us here, where he discharged functions, here as Chief Minister, there as Leader of the Opposition, and there as Speaker. I very much look forward now to the work we will do together for our Gibraltar, because Gibraltar must always come first, before parties and before self. That is our duty in this place.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Here's Peter Caruana now.
Your Excellency, Mr. Speaker, it is for me an honour to participate in my 6th successive ceremonial opening of the Gibraltar Parliament, the 2nd as Leader of the Opposition, and the 2nd also since it formally became a Parliament under the 2006 Constitution. Your Excellency, under our new Constitution, as indeed is the case in the United Kingdom, our legislature consists of Her Majesty the Queen and this Parliament. And earlier, before Your Excellency arrived, Mr. Speaker was reminding us of days when Sovereign and Parliament were at odds and life expectancy among speakers was not great. I'm glad to say that this Parliament is not at odds with its Sovereign, and therefore it is as much our pleasure as it is indeed constitutionally appropriate that just as Her Majesty presides over the opening of Parliament at Westminster, you, as Her Majesty's personal representative here in Gibraltar, should open our new Parliament. This is the best possible reflection of both our British parliamentary and constitutional tradition and of the fact that Her Majesty is Queen of Gibraltar, on whose behalf and in which capacity you open this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, congratulations to you on behalf of this side of the House for your reappointment as its Speaker. Our initial nomination of you when we were in government was not supported by the present government when they were in opposition, and it is they who now nominate you, and we support that nomination. That must be a matter of some personal satisfaction to you. When we were in government, we approved of the many indulgences traditionally allowed to oppositions in this House, and of course we now look forward to being the beneficiaries of the same indulgences, save of course as may be the result of properly consulted consensus reform. From the very outset of the last Parliament, the then opposition repeatedly referred to and made a great play on what they thought was the democratic significance of the size of our then electoral majority, which was considerably larger than the one that they now enjoy. We will not do the same. In a democracy, the rules and principles are clear. The winner of the majority of parliamentary seats allocated by whatever method the electoral law provides, and regardless of the size of the electoral majority, has the same unqualified democratic legitimacy to govern. However, that is not to say that the extraordinary closeness of the vote has no political implications. The fact is that despite the supposedly clear and urgent need for change after 15.5 years of successful GSD government, we have not been swept from office, rather nudged to wait in the wings. Nor, as is usual when political power changes hands in Gibraltar, has the new government been swept into office. Rather, they have been inserted into office with palpable mathematical and political reluctance on the part of the electorate. The political ramifications of this are, I think, clear. The new government is very much on probation, and the electorate will expect them to honour the very wide-ranging, all-embracing, and very individually targeted manifesto commitments by which they undoubtedly secured their very slender electoral majority. We, for our part, will be helping the electorate monitor and assess the government's progress in that politically essential respect. Gibraltar has come a long way in the last 15 years, and we hope that it will continue to prosper under the new government. The economy is well set to continue to prosper and grow, even in the current difficult global climate to which Your Excellency has already referred. Mr. Speaker, the usual device to which newly elected governments that know they have promised much more than they can possibly deliver resort to is to say that having got in, looked at the books and found a worse than expected situation, they cannot afford their manifesto commitments or that they will take longer to deliver than promised. This device will not be available to the honourable members opposite. The size of the public debt has been much debated. The government continues to produce healthy budget surpluses and our economy continues to grow. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the current financial year, which ends in March 2012, is set to produce an all-time record budget surplus of around £40 million, and tax revenues continue rising. As to economic growth, in my budget speech earlier this year, I estimated that our economy had grown in the year to March 2010 by 6.5% to £954 million. In fact, statistics that became available just days before polling day show that the final estimate of growth to March 2010 is actually 11.4% to £998 million. This upward revision in the final estimate of economic growth is mainly due to a rise in the figure for the gross trading profits of companies. If we assume that in the last year to March 2011 it grew by just 5%, and I believe that it will have grown by much more than that, then our GDP stood at £1.05 billion at the start of this financial year. With net public debt, that is gross debt less cash reserves, at about £280 million, that puts net public debt at less than 27% of last year's GDP. When the 2010-2011 figure is known, it will almost certainly turn out, that the figure for GDP is known, it will almost certainly turn out to be an even lower percentage of last year's GDP. In any event, Mr. Speaker, Your Excellency, the government's manifesto says that it will be financed by a 65% growth in GDP over the next 4 years. Mr. Speaker, two factors are key to our continuing economic success. The first is our excellent international reputation, which has taken years to obtain and build up, and which can be lost much more quickly. Sound judgment and great care will therefore need to be exercised by the government, not least about who is allowed to invest in Gibraltar. The second is the openness of our economy. We share the new government's objective of local jobs for local people, even though we disagree on the means of going about it. We need to be careful not to destabilise the real job market and not to saddle the taxpayer with unnecessary annual cost by the creation of unreal and unnecessary public sector or publicly funded employment. We also need to be very careful not to undermine employers' freedom of action as to who they can employ and when, to the point where they will cease to find Gibraltar an attractive place to be. The result of that would be massive job destruction and very significant loss of government tax revenue. Mr. Speaker, speaking of public debt, there is a manifesto commitment with the implementation of which the Chief Minister could make immediate progress, as I told him during the election campaign. There are around £200 million of pensioner monthly government debentures, all or part of which he could, with effect from January 2012, transfer from the government to the Gibraltar Savings Bank, by whom they always used to be issued before we changed the practice, and thus we brought them into the reckoning for public debt. This would immediately reduce the gross public debt from around 500 million to any amount of his choice, down to around 300 million. And, Mr. Speaker, as I have said, he can do that very quickly in 4 weeks and not in 4 years. I am not, of course, encouraging him to do this. It is wholly unnecessary. But I am illustrating the economic pointlessness of debate based on gross as opposed to the net public debt. And in that context, I am also putting into perspective his manifesto commitment to halve the gross public debt. He could deliver his commitment, as I said, in 4 weeks rather than 4 years. Let's be clear, Mr. Speaker. If the Chief Minister is really concerned about the level of government debt, which I am not, then he has to cut the net debt, not the gross debt. There is no real reduction in meaningful indebtedness unless you reduce the net public debt. Mr. Speaker, there are 2 projects which, in our view, are vital to Gibraltar's continuing progress and prosperity: the new power station and the tunnel under the runway. Without the power station, the quantity and resilience of our electricity supply, on which our economy and society depends, will be put in serious doubt. Without the tunnel, our vehicular traffic flows cannot be separated from aviation activity at the airfield and border queues, and an end put to chaos and delays that they cause to traffic throughout Gibraltar. Both projects require additional borrowing, and with net public debt at less than 27% of GDP, this is prudently and easily affordable. We planned to finance the power station by a combination of bank finance, which is in place, and a long-term bond placement. We will support the new government in any parliamentary approval that may be required for additional borrowing for these projects. Mr. Speaker, whilst we will hold the government to account, especially against their electoral promises, this opposition will support, not undermine the government where the interests of Gibraltar must come first, in areas such as economic development, in creating confidence amongst lenders and investors in our economy, and in government's financial strength, or in the defence of our self-government and political rights and aspirations as a people. Every government of Gibraltar has made progress in improving the quality and extent of our self-government. I hope that my government is seen to have done so too. We all value and understand the need for and importance of good working relations with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. But this Parliament and the government elected out of it is not subservient or accountable to, nor subject to the consent of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. If that were so, our constitutional advancement would have been meaningless. The government can rely on our support on this question as well. As it can also to resist and reject any possibility of return to bilateralism about our affairs between the United Kingdom and Spain, or to negotiations or discussions about our sovereignty. There are 3 very good reasons for this. Because the UK has promised not to do so, because it's a violation of our rights and wishes as a people and we do not want it, and because it's a violation of our right to self-determination, which is now
a provision in our constitution and thus legally binding on the United Kingdom government. I fear, however, that we will continue to disagree on the best approach in relation to delisting at the United Nations. The United Nations delisting criteria do not permit us to have both the things that we want, namely maximum self-government and British sovereignty with close constitutional links to Britain. Since we are not willing to give up either of these things, it follows that what we must do is to condemn the United Nations delisting criteria as anachronistic and demand that they be changed so as to allow us to delist whilst keeping both of the things that we want and are entitled to. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I have, as the House knows, already had an unprecedented transition meeting with the new Chief Minister. I remain at his entire disposal in relation to any other continuing matters that straddle our administrations. In concluding, Mr. Speaker, I would like to deal with three matters shortly. First of all, I would like to take this first parliamentary opportunity to recognise and thank for the work that they have done, not just for this Parliament, but for the governance of Gibraltar, my two previous ministerial colleagues who are no longer in this House, my deputy Joe Holliday and Yvette Delaware. Secondly, I would like to take this first parliamentary opportunity to join all that I've already mentioned, the passing of Bob Palisa, who has been historically an important member of this House, regardless of political differences on issues or ideologies. And thirdly, I would like to join those who have already done so in welcoming the new members elected on both sides of this House.
Well, there we had the speeches, a speech by the Governor and the replies by the Chief Minister and Leader of the Opposition, as Sir Adrian Johns now exits the chamber, followed by the mace bearer and the Speaker, bringing today's session of Parliament and the ceremonial opening to an end. Now, as the Governor exits the building, there will be a guard of honour by the Royal Gibraltar Regiment. It's a variety of speeches. Let me just remind you that tributes have been paid to the late Sir Robert Palisa. The new members of Parliament have been welcomed, and to the Governor, who is the representative of the Queen for today's session, reiterating Britain's commitment to the sovereignty of Gibraltar in his speech today. The members of Parliament, both government ministers and opposition members, now also leave. Making their way, and of course a reminder that Chief Minister Fabian Picardo mentioned that perhaps the cameras will return. They want to make monthly sessions of Parliament, and it's also this government's intention to have proceedings televised in the future. As you can see, the Governor is still upstairs in the ante-room. We also had a glimpse there of the Leader of the Opposition, Peter Caruana, and now members leave the chamber. Adolfo Canepa, they're in the picture. We also have election agents for both parties who've been present here today. And this is the Royal Gibraltar Regiment outside Parliament in a sunny main street, awaiting for the Governor to leave Parliament building. The crowd also waiting. Many have been here since early this morning. It's the ceremonial opening of Parliament, the second Gibraltar Parliament since the new constitution. And the governor now exits Parliament House.
Excellency, guard, home guards, and awaiting for inspection. Very much, I'll inspect.
And just like he did with the guard of the Royal Gibraltar Police, he now inspects the guard of the Royal Gibraltar Regiment. Governor Sir Adrian Johns, who in his speech has highlighted the global financial difficulties and how the future of the Eurozone is in the spotlight. Also going through a list of the changes planned by the new government according to the GSLP Liberal Manifesto. And today's opening of the Gibraltar Parliament signals the start of their work in Parliament. Of course, the government has already been working for about 2 weeks. We saw Fabian Picardo and his other ministers at the office the morning after the election, but today, by taking the oath of allegiance, it gives them the official power to start transacting business in Parliament. And with these pictures is where we leave our coverage on Wednesday, 21st of December 2011, the ceremonial opening of the Gibraltar Parliament. Of course, GBC Television, Radio Gibraltar and through our online service will continue to bring you coverage of parliamentary procedures as they take place. Thank you very much for joining us for our coverage. Have yourselves a very good day.